Shoes. Skitja. Broken. Chasseur. Shoon. Lots of words from they're bags that go over your feet, stop them getting soaked. Early medieval shoes are great, and before we talk about them, this is a general coffee shout out to all of my lovely coffee subscribers. So thank you ever so much everyone who has been very kindly donating. Thank you to all my coffee people. It is lovely of you to be doing this. It's been really helpful, especially this month, as things have been a little bit difficult for everybody, I know. So let's move straight on. I am not a professional leather worker, I am not a cobbler or a shoemaker, I've received no formal training whatsoever in making shoes. At all, ever, from anyone. These are not going to be perfect, I already know that going in. This is me practicing my skills and getting better at them. So, why am I, Lachlonor Cymraeg, the Welsh Viking, doing a video about Irish Viking Age shoes? The reason I'm doing a video about Irish shoes and not Welsh Viking Age shoes is because we haven't got any Welsh Viking Age shoes yet. We have yet to excavate any shoes from the Viking period from Wales, which is a bit of a bummer, but there you go. We have precious few textile finds and organic finds from Wales from the Viking period. The second reason that I am looking at Viking Age Irish shoes is Irish, Western Scotland and Welsh culture in the Viking Age is all kind of interestingly connected and quite similar in an awful lot of ways. Not identical by any means, but a lot of the religious practices, a lot of the artwork, and a lot of the legal side of things are really strangely closely connected. Maybe not strangely closely connected, but are notably close to each other. And of course the languages are very closely related as well. Gaelic and Welsh aren't as closely connected as Gaelic and Gaelic, but still, you know, or Manx and Gaelic and Gaelic. Yay, Goidelic. So we've got lots of images of shoes from Viking Age Ireland and just pre-Viking Age Ireland as well. And an awful lot of them seem to have this interesting shape where they have the main body of the shoe and then a highly decorated tongue, and some of them have straps at the sides. So it seems like this very popular form of shoe continues right the way through the Viking Age in Ireland. And we have finds of them from near Belfast, we have finds of them from Dublin, we have finds of them from County Leitrim, we have a find from, I believe, London of this type of shoe. And it's called usually either the Gaelic slipper or the Irish type shoe. So what does it consist of? Well, it consists of a single piece of leather, sometimes sheep or goat I believe was used as well, that has been cut in this fairly complex way. It's quite a complex pattern, especially for a beginner like me to try and make, and it's then sewn inside out and turned. This is what is generally, imaginatively enough, called a turn shoe, and it's the most common kind of shoe from the Viking Age. You sew the shoe inside out, usually on a last, so on a wooden blank the shape of a foot, which is a really useful tool if you're making a pair of leather shoes that you want to actually fit a human foot, instead of just being a foot bag. It lets you mould the leather around a foot-shaped object. And then once you've sewn it, you take it off the last, and you literally just turn it inside. You just turn it. It's a turn shoe, you turn it the right way around once you finish sewing it. There are lots of different types of turn shoe, there are loads of patterns all over the internet. I'll link to a couple of places that have sort of usable patterns for this Irish style of shoe, but honestly there are dozens of them. If you are a halfway knowledgeable leather worker or costume creator, you can probably make your own pattern for these that will work just as well as any of the ones I could provide for you. How do you make these things? Well, obviously the first step is to draw that pattern. You draw the pattern to your size. Make sure that you're using your foot as your template. Draw the pattern that you're going to use to make the shoe. Once you've drawn that pattern, make a mock-up. Mock-ups are really, really useful things. I made mine out of paper. Other people make theirs out of tin foil. Some people make theirs out of gaffer tape that they mould around their foot, kind of to make a last, and then you can put your mock-up onto that last. There are loads of different ways of doing this. Some of them are more DIY than the others. I just made mine out of paper. It worked well enough. Once you've made your mock-up, check that it fits. If it doesn't fit, if it looks like crap, make a new one. which is what I had to do. So after my third attempt at making a mock-up, I had a pattern that I was fairly happy with. Step 2, get your leather. My leather that I'm using is actually sheep. So this is some oak-tanned sheep skin that is absolutely lovely. It's fairly thin, it's about 1.5 millimeters thin. You can get thinner leather, but this is a one-piece shoe, so I want the sole to have a little bit of thickness to it. If I was making it with 0.5 mil thick leather, it would be no time at all before the sole wore through, and I don't want that. After you've made your choice of leather, you can then cut the leather to the pattern, leaving excess around all the sides that you need to leave excess on, because you can always trim it down to make it smaller. You cannot add more leather to it to make it bigger without putting seams in. So don't do that if you can help it. I sewed mine inside out, as is, as far as we can tell, the way of doing it. So sew them inside out. And I did it piecemeal, so I would work on, for example, the back end of the shoe. I'd do the heel, and I would then stop sewing, wrap it around my foot, pin it on my foot, test it on the last, make sure that it still looks like it's going to fit. If it looks like it's going to fit, great. If it doesn't, adjustments need to be made. So make adjustments, keep adjusting, keep an eye on the seams, make sure that you're not tearing any holes in the leather that you don't want to make. And the way that I found was really easy to make these seams kind of quickly and easily, but still fairly strong, he says, as he looks at his seam that is definitely not strong enough sewed. Don't look at that, don't look at the seam. Is to work it wet. So when you work leather, you can manipulate it, you can stretch it, you can pierce holes in it really, really easily. The holes will stay open a lot longer than they would if you were using dry leather, so work your leather wet. Soak it, literally just wet the leather, and then work it. And it'll be much, much easier to use. And then as it dries, it will shrink, and it'll close up those seams. So instead of working it dry and the seams just being as they are, when you work it wet, the seams will then tighten up, and it makes them obviously stronger seams, it makes the shoe more watertight. And that's something that I've learned from making other shoes that weren't really very good previously, is work it wet, sew it wet. I sewed these using waxed linen thread, so thick waxed linen thread, waxed just with beeswax. And then the stitch I used was a running stitch. So a running stitch is literally the simplest stitch you can think of. It's that one. There you go. I'm very good. So I sewed it using a running stitch, and then I went back over the running stitch in the opposite direction. So the first time I went like that, and the second time I went like that. So they crisscross, you see? You have a crisscross. And then I tightened them as tight as I physically could. I did cut my finger open tightening it too much. Don't do that if you can help it. Jimmy's pro tip, don't cut your finger open. And that's it. That's literally it. That's it. After you've finished sewing the seams, and you've been testing them all the way around, you turn the shoe. Is shoe. Is shoe. It's done. I've done it. It's finished. There you go. Job done. So, that's a finished shoe. The next stage for me was decoration. So these slippers that we've got from Ireland, some of them are really highly decorated. Some of them are more highly decorated than others, absolutely. The ones that I'm basing these on have these amazing decorated tongues. So let's just get this focusing, shall we? So this amazing decorated tongue that we've got here is what we are trying to replicate. And here's my version, and it's got this embossing here, and it's then got these holes cut out. So the way I embossed this decorative tongue was embossed using a series of tools. The first tool that I used was the end of a ballpoint pen that has no more ink left in it. Then I moved on to kind of a scriber, a sort of a scraper that had the end rounded off slightly. So it wasn't digging into the leather. It wasn't cutting and slicing the leather. It was just making an impression in the leather. Then I used the back end of a very small spoon-shaped piece of metal. I'd literally just had these pieces of metal, rounded the end of it, piece of steel, rounded the end of it into basically a teaspoon handle-shaped piece of metal, used it on the wet leather, wet the leather, always wet the leather when you're tooling around, haha. And that was it. Dead simple, really easy. I did do some actual engraving, so the stripe that goes up the centre, just there, it's called a vamp stripe. This is the vamp, it's the vamp stripe. I did engrave that, so I did actually slice ever so slightly into the leather, because on the originals it looks like that is actually sliced in the leather, in some of the originals. Bear in mind we've got a good half dozen finds of this type of shoe. Some of them are decorated with incisions, some of them are decorated with embossing, some of them are decorated with both, some of them are decorated with neither. These are a variety of different shoes. So how does mine actually compare to the original? Mine is slightly rough compared to the original. Like I say, I'm not a professional. I'm not. I haven't done this for the last 25 years and worked an apprenticeship. You know, I make a pair of shoes once every couple of years, maybe. So the stitching on the side is functional. It's okay. It's got that fun kind of crimped look that some of the originals have on the edge. I'm quite proud of the heels on them, actually. Quite proud of the heel. I think the heel looks quite neat. The heel's quite nice. The idea is that this stitch looks invisible from the outside, and I haven't managed to accomplish invisibility, but I've accomplished an okay stitch. I think that's okay, that's fine. Like I say, I've made shoes before, and the first pair of early medieval shoes that I made is hot garbage, to be quite honest. They're not well-made shoes. Here they are. Here's one of them, at least. This has been oiled up, so it's got that nice dark brown. Compare it to a shoe from that same batch of leather that hasn't been oiled. And that is what a difference the oiling makes. I think this is linseed. Is this linseed? It might be linseed and vinegar, or it might just be rapeseed. I think it's canola oil that you call it in North America. So there you go. So this is literally a foot bag. It's got a hole at one end for your foot to go through. It's made in two pieces, so this was a sole and an upper. It is a turn shoe, so I did sew it inside out using the same technique as I did on the Irish shoes. It's a running stitch that just sort of goes all the way around there. And then I crisscrossed it with a running stitch going in the opposite way. So first of all, starting on that side and then that side. So we have crisscrossed running stitches. It's decorated at the front. It has a vamp stripe. This was my first attempt at a vamp stripe, made in silk yarn. And then it's been resized. So this massive, ugly-looking scar is a period-appropriate resizing that I had to do on this particular pair of shoes. So, yeah. Once again, not a professional shoemaker. But they fit, and amazingly, they're waterproof. So despite how it may look from the outside, this stitching here looks very, very sort of primitive and basic, but this is fine. This has got me through several events. This has got me through very rainy, very stormy weather without letting any water in. And I can see daylight through this seam. This isn't a good, well-made seam at all. I'm not sure if you can see light through it if I hold it up to the camera, but I can see daylight through parts of this seam. Not many parts of it, granted, but occasional bits of it. So this was my first attempt at a pair of shoes. This is way, way simpler than this slipper. So this slipper has more shaping to it. It's made of one piece of leather, which I think makes it more complicated. It's got the pointy toe. This has got a very basic rounded toe. You do see this style of shoe with a rounded toe. So here's an example from the National Museum Ireland Archaeology in Dublin. Bala Clia. I can't pronounce it. I don't speak Gaelic. I speak Gaelic. Hamidulich. But this is a shape that you see in this style of shoe. So instead of having a pointy toe, it would just have a round toe, which is your choice to make, really, I guess. These are fine for Viking age as well. This is very common shape. Probably the simplest two-piece shoe you'll see will be something like this, with smaller holes at the top, with a bigger hole like this one, with a smaller hole, with some holes around the back end, around the heel end, to put leather thonging through so that you can tighten it to the ankle, as in this example. Other styles of shoe in Viking Age Ireland include the Dublin boot, so this was found in the old harbour in Dublin. This is probably a work boot or a heavy-duty piece of footwear. It's made of thicker leather than most of the slippers. It's a turn shoe as well. As far as I know, it's a two-piece, so it's got a sole and an upper, and that is effectively this guy again, but with the leather going further up here. So the leather just continues up here, which is simple. Really, really simple way of making a shoe. The opening at the front, effectively, instead of having the seam there, you have a seam here at the front. It, honest to God, is so simple to make this style of shoe. The other, even simpler type of shoe that you can make, based off an Irish find, an early medieval Irish find, is these. And these are Pampooties or gillies. They have various names depending where you're from. They're all broken. They're all shoes. Broken. Broken. Brogue is the Gaelic and Gallic word for shoe. Brogue is where the word brogue comes from. So when you talk about brogues as shoes, you're literally just saying shoes. Broken shoes. This is the quickest, dirtiest early medieval shoe that you can make. You see some versions of this kind of pampootie where this front end, all of these bits are individually slit down here, so you get a really close fit to your toes, and it really sort of scrunches up and makes that kind of, you know, monkey's paw shape. You put your foot in and it's nice. This hasn't had that done. This hasn't been cut at all except down the back end. So here is one that is being dismantled before your very eyes. Editing Jimmy, get rid of the next 30 seconds of me swearing whilst I try and undo this sodding thing. I should have done this before. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. It would have been worse if I made them out of a rawhide, because I didn't do that. Okay, wait, here we go. Oh, no. Nope. Yes! Oh, victory will be mine. I'll not be defeated by a Pampootie. 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 Oh my god, there we go. Okay, wow. Okay, cool, super cool. Groovy, excellent, fabulous, wonderful, terrific, and great. Cool, alright. There we go. Alright, so this is what it looks like. That's it. That's the shoe. This is the shoe. You can see from the absolutely disgusting marking on the inside where my foot is inside it. This is a very, very basic shoe. These were actually used on Rathlin in Ireland up to about the 1950s and 60s as disposable shoes, disposable footwear used and made by fishermen and farmers. And if you need a pair of shoes in a hurry, if you don't want to wear your nice shoes or your good boots, you're not that bothered about your feet necessarily being a little bit uncomfortable or wet, these are ideal. They protect you from the worst of the weather, from the worst of the terrain, and what I found really, really cool is if you wear these with wool socks that have been made using the Nalbind technique, if you look at them, the impression of the wool sock gets left in the leather. So this is now permanently marked, embossed with my Nalbind sock texture on the inside, and it's worn through to the outside. So this is actually a really interesting little instance of something that we get from the archaeology, is the impression of these textiles being left in other artifacts. So some of the time you will see textile remains, their impressions left in things, and I find it absolutely fascinating. This is something that happens in my Pampooties when I wear my Nalbind socks. So thank you, Jen, for those socks. It's amazing what it can teach you, having a friend who Nalbinds. So how do you make these things? Well, you obviously put your foot on a piece of paper or on some leather if you are feeling dangerous. Measure around it so that you've got enough to fold over the front. And go up the back. Chop out this kind of arch shape, I guess, archway shape, this rounded archway shape. Bung a few holes in the back, and in the back of mine I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 holes. Make it an uneven number so that you can go like that, is what I was taught. Sew it up with some leather thonging up the back. Make some holes around the front so that you can gather it up. Comme ça. You've made a pair of shoes. There you go. These have got a few more holes up the front, up towards the middle, so that you can kind of cross-garter them over your foot here. And I've worn these for 2 York Viking festivals. I've done Viking fighting in them, I've done marching on tarmac, on grass, on gravel, I've gone hiking in these. They serve their purpose. There's a reason these were used for 1,000 years, this exact design of shoe. And these are something that you see in the Western Isles, on the Highlands of Scotland, you see them in Ireland, you see them in, I think, a couple of other countries in Europe as well. They're such a basic design, but they really do work. And what I find especially pleasing about making these kinds of shoe is that you start seeing things that you see in the artifacts in museums. So you start seeing the eyelet holes forming wrinkles in the same places you see them forming wrinkles in the original artifacts. If you want shoes that are not necessarily Irish, but are okay as Viking shoes, obviously there are lots of other options. There are other types of shoe in Ireland, in the National Museum. There's the sort of more standard pointy-toed Viking, Scandinavian, Anglo-Scandinavian, Hiberno-Norse style shoe. This is one that I bought. I did not make this shoe. This you might recognise from my How to Clean Mouldy Shoes video from a few months ago. This one is shaped a little differently. If you unfold it a little, it has a very similar shape to the Dublin Harbour boot. So it's very similar in shape to that, but this one is intended to be closed with a toggle at the side rather than just worn as a high boot. If you are going to go for a pair of shoes, and I'm not going to mention any companies or anything, try to find one where the sole and the riser is sewn on, not nailed on. The nails in this sole, although it's very sturdy, have started to rot the leather a little, and they are rusting and they're corroding and discolouring it. And that's not something that we really see in Viking Age footwear, so if you can afford to, get yourself some properly sewn soles on your shoes. These are based off some from York, Viking Age York in England, so we will say nothing more about them. Oops. This took me, this pair of Gaelic slippers, which I made not using a proper last, so they look like hot garbage, took me about, probably, in terms of full days of work, took me probably about 2 or 3 days to make. Doing all of the sewing took about 2 or 3 days to make. They fit okay. I designed these size-wise to be worn with my Nalbin socks. If you want to wear them without socks, obviously use your feet without any stockings as your measurements. Make sure that they're nice and close to your feet. If you want to add some straps to them, so some cross straps over the bridge of your shoe, or the bridge of your foot, there's a theory that they use the holes in the tongues as, checking my mic still on, as holes for the cross straps to go through, so the strap would go like that, and it would stop the tongue flapping up and down, which seems quite sensible, because this thing is a little bit of a flappy flap. Pop yourself a couple of holes just around, halfway-ish there. Make it to your size. Make it to your taste and to your size. And that's it, guys, that's it. That's a pair of Irish Viking Age shoes. Probably popular right around the Irish Sea, so Western Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the Isle of Man. You have a pair of Pampooties that we know were popular in Scotland as well. And you have your generic early medieval foot bag, which is good basically across Western Europe. If you're lucky enough to live in York, you have access to York Archaeological Trust's masses of information on the Viking leatherwork that they found there. If you live in Dublin, and at some point you have access to the National Museum again, pop in, have a look at their leather and their Viking shoes. You are spoilt for choice, frankly, if you are living in and around the Dublin area and you want to make a set of Viking shoes for yourself, you are spoilt for choice. One final note on gendering. As far as we're aware, shoes in the Viking Age were not gendered, especially not Scandinavian style shoes. We have no evidence that shoes were gendered and boots were gendered, as far as I'm aware. Don't come at me in the comments because I've looked and you're on a hiding to nothing. So wear whatever kind of style shoe you want. I don't care, no one else should care. It's 2020, make whatever damn shoe you like. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was at least a little bit useful if you're making your own pair of shoes. I hope you enjoyed looking at what I'm going to be wearing at all of my reenactments soon. I may have some reviews of how these fit and how these work after I've used them for a little bit longer, but for now, we shall see how this goes. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you are enjoying my videos, please do like, do subscribe, do all that nonsense that YouTube has asked you to do, because my channel is growing and it's really exciting. So thank you ever so much. Got some very exciting plans for the rest of the year and next year as well. Just thinking about this one-piece sole. The soles have been repaired on the originals too much. They've been clump repaired. See how long this lasts. But yeah, I will see you next time. Diolch unwaith eto am wylio. Thank you ever so much once again for watching. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now. Shut up.